What's the view of Ahmadiyya concerning Shiites? That's about it.
Yes, please, you can sit here for a while. Already I have expressed my views on this question in fundamentals, because there is so much to argue about between the Shia world and Sunni world in general, and also Ahmadiyya point of view with regards to their debate in between, that it would require ages to finish all that debate, which is spread over last about 12 centuries or so, 13 centuries maybe. So instead of going into that detail, which is anyway of no avail to us, I'll explain why. I speak on this subject in principles, from the philosophical point of view. Why this debate is futile and useless is because the Shias would prefer to treat their traditions more respectfully and than the traditions as quoted by the Sunni ulama. And the vice versa is also true. If I quote a tradition from a Sunni ulama, alim, which contradicts the Shia philosophy or Shia doctrine in any way, it is so easy for a Shia to produce a counter tradition, countering that evidence from the Sunni treasure of traditions, plentiful of traditions on all subjects. So one for one or two for one could be produced from the pocket of each opponent. The result would be that it would be just a useless effort, a meaningless exercise to go into debate with each other by somebody quoting a hadith supporting his view from Sunni traditions and another Shia quoting another hadith from his own traditions opposing the subject of the previous hadith and so on. So it's useless. Moreover, in the last 1400 years, so much darkness has fallen on these subjects because of hatred, because of malice, because of even battles fought between Shias and Sunnis, because of false people appearing under the garb of holy men sometimes and spreading falsehood against their enemies from both sides, that the whole issue is obscured now. It is very difficult for us to see the light of truth penetrating through the dark ages of 1400 years. Not all of them were dark, of course, but the 1000 or 1100 years which are on our side were, of course, ages of darkness compared to the first 3 centuries closer to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So all this issue makes the debate extremely unreliable, to say the least. My attitude is completely different. It is not based on traditions. Why I do not become a Shia? That is the question. I'm telling you. Because in my opinion, if I accept Shiaism, I can't do it without being disrespectful to the Holy Prophet of Islam and also to the message of Islam, that is the Holy Quran. And without contradicting the fundamental features of Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's advantage over other prophets, and without contradicting the fundamental teachings of the Holy Quran, giving advantage to the teaching of this book over the teaching of the rest of the books of the world. So far I have not illustrated, so you are confused. I'm going to explain further, step by step. The greatest tribute we pay to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not from ourselves but as dictated in the Holy Quran, is that he enlarged the field of his beneficence from the Arab world to the rest of the world as well. Previous to him, the prophets were either tribal or regional, and their benefits flowed from them to their own people. They were not for the entire world. The result was, that, as we see in the Holy Quran, Jesus Christ is referred to as Rasulun ila Bani Israel. He was a prophet who benefited a particular race that is referred to as Bani Israel. Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the founder of Islam, came to broaden all this, to destroy all the barriers, with the result that the Holy Quran refers to him as Rahmatul lil Alameen. Rasulun, not ila Bani Israel, but to the Nas al-Jamiyah, the whole mankind. Ya ayyuhan nasu inni Rasulullahi ilaykum jamiyah. So that means that the trend in Islam is for broadening the beneficence of prophethood and the favors which may flow from prophethood to the rest of the world. Any philosophy based on narrowing that and reversing that process is unacceptable to me. Now, as I understand the Shia philosophy, if I am correct, they say that his favors were not even for the entire Arabs, not only for his first companions unlimitedly, but his favors were narrowed for his own personal family. And he came to create leadership, spiritual leadership for his own progeny. If he had no son, he would have progeny through his daughter. The result would be that the imamat from then on would remain confined for all times to come to his own personal progeny. And the rest of mankind is only mentioned as if in the Holy Quran by way of mollification or, winning them over and saying, well, this is the Rasul common for you. His benefit would flow without any barriers to east as well as to the west. But in reality, what he has done is, he has seen to it, according to the Shia philosophy as I understand, that from then on, imamat and the very best of nema would remain entirely confined to his progeny and to none else will it ever be granted. Now, this is, to my mind, is most obnoxious. I can't accept it. The second point is, it's not a debate. I'm telling you, you are asking a question, whether you like it or not. I must be very honest. I must be very honest with my answer. First, let me finish. Secondly, it is again a reflection upon the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran repeatedly tells us, that Allah does not care for blood relationship. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Inna ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qabaila lita'arafu. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. That Allah doesn't care for racial superiorities or family superiorities. What He cares for is the quality of your fear of Allah. So whatever favors He is going to bestow upon you are to be judged by your quality of taqwa and by nothing else. So any artificial barrier created in the way of this general principle is, to my mind, un-Quranic and un-Islamic barrier. And any philosophy based on this is, to my mind, is rejectable philosophy. Secondly, again, the Holy Quran quotes it by way of example and makes us understand that the blood relationship would not be of any avail to you, because He quotes the example of Hazrat Noah's son. Now, why should Allah bring to disrepute one of His prophets, and a prophet of that status as Hazrat Noah was? A very special prophet he was, and all over the world he is highly respected. So why should He bring him to disrepute by saying that till the end he went on debating and arguing with Allah the case of his son, who was his son all right, because the Holy Quran refers him to be as his son. But Allah continues to reject and ultimately uses very harsh language against him. Say, La tukum min al-jahilin. Behave yourself. What are you doing? We know better who belongs to you and who doesn't belong to you. Innahu amalun ghayru salih. Because he is not a righteous person, so he is not of your progeny. On the contrary, those who did not have any blood relationship with Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself were declared by Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam to belong to his progeny in so many words. For example, Hazrat Salman Farsi, he had